Hey everybody, super excited to be here with Alex, a long time, nearly crypto OG, right? I mean, we go back quite a while. You got in really early on, I think, 2015, 2016, around that time, right?
Well,
And you came sort of more from a corporate background, but I think rather than me telling about how you got into crypto, maybe you share a bit of background, and super excited to have you, long time builder, creator, and thinker in the crypto space.
amazing. What an excellent mini intro, Stefan. And wonderful, wonderful, wonderful to be talking with you again, my friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a while. I feel like I kind of got into crypto from it's not really the academic space, but I've always thought like, okay, finance, like there's people with money and there's people who need money, and finance is basically supposed to be the bare minimum to connect those two in the most efficient way possible. And so I got out of doing an MBA in 2015, and you're all filled with these big frameworks and models, and then you get into the real industry, and it's like, oh, this is chaos. This is just monkeys on typewriters. And there's tons of smart people and wonderful institutions in the traditional finance world, but it's grown into this colossus, and a lot of it is just we don't have great technology that underlies it, so we've just sort of layered on all of these obfuscation mechanisms up and up and up. And I'm sure we'll talk about a bunch of the stuff today, but crypto to me always was a way to sort of wipe the slate clean and start fresh from kind of a new methodology where we codify incentives and really kind of start at the ground floor again. So I mean, well, yeah, we've known each other for 4 or 5 years now. I think you were an advisor to our fund when we first left banking,
Yeah.
and it's
True.
awesome to be back on with you. So I mean, just to finish kind of my story into the industry a little bit. So graduated, did an MBA, did investment banking for a while, did mergers and acquisitions, financial institutions group, fintech, and then actually started a crypto group within a bank, which in 2017, just when things were starting to kind of go up and up and up, and actually got a really interesting sense of, and then a really interesting sense of kind of how big banks look at the digital asset space, and there's a lot of talent and a lot of intelligence and a lot of smart people that are trying to figure this out and trying to get it right, but it's so anathema to how a lot of traditional finance works that really hard, especially in the early days when a lot of the institutionalization and a lot of the infrastructure and a lot of kind of the realness that we had developed, and a lot has gone up in smoke, but that existed even less back in 2017, 2018, right? So left in 2018 and got full time into the industry. Did a venture fund, which is where we first met, and then we've done all sorts of interesting things since then: yield, stable coins, some augmented reality, some golf technology stuff.
Golf
So
technologies. Yeah.
it's been a ride for the last 3 4 years.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting part about crypto in a way, right? There are just so many opportunities and possibilities that allow you to sort of create and build and see what flies, what takes off, what doesn't work, how to rectify it, how to curve it, right? And how to continue to find a model, engage the right kind of people to support that, to move forward, right? Endorse the teams building on that. I mean, that's the beauty of it, right?
Well, and that's what I've always been impressed with your journey through the crypto ecosystem as well, Stefan. Is you come from more of a I don't know if traditional tech is the right
Yeah,
word
yeah.
for the background, but you've started multiple things. You've kind of explored some fun constructs. You've really sort of hit the nail on the head a few times. Gone through some CeFi players, built some DeFi stuff,
Yeah.
and you're sort of always kind of building and experimenting, and that's why it's always so fun to kind of keep up with where you're at and what you're doing latest. And I think you hit the nail on the head with one super interesting thing there, and it's crypto in so many ways bucks tradition, right? And there's sort of two schools of thought on this. I think we've seen over and over again where when crypto bucks tradition too much, we lose sight of risk fundamentals and we make all the same mistakes as TradFi. But there's certain things like people running multiple projects and being
Yeah.
a lawyer and an investor and a builder, and all of those things, kind of traditional mindsets are like, no, you need to do one thing and you maximize shareholder value in one way, and this is what you need to do all the time. but it's almost like this, this concept of
That's it.
modern composable entrepreneurship, right? And you
Yeah.
can do 100 things in crypto. And
Yeah.
I still think we don't want to go too far in one direction. And particularly myself, I'm constantly learning what's the best way to take these 100 things that we're working on and sort of build it down into the one thing that makes the most sense right now. But it's such an open world possibility of an industry, even in such a chaotic time like this.
Yeah, but what I liked, I mean, really about our journeys, or that in a way, whilst we've always been on other sides of the planet, right? I've been in Hong Kong and Japan, and you've been in Toronto, and we meet up in New York, but somehow or rather, we've always sort of found similar opportunities, right? In terms of seeing where the sort of next movements are in terms of yield opportunity, right? In terms of what was stable coins, right? In terms of new areas that are emerging and that represent a great opportunity for, the blockchain represents a great platform for those specific businesses or business models. And I always found that interesting and in a way weird. Yeah, and then we even
Well,
came into regen finance, right? Remember regenerative finance? We got into that around the same time, right? So it's like, yeah, interesting.
well, and I think these all kind of build on some core fundamentals of the space of, hey, there's a bunch of ways that the existing world and industry has done things, and a lot of the time it's not the best way to do it, but we're always anchored by this legacy technology. And
Yeah,
so when you kind of take the shackles off of that and for better or for worse, create this kind of limitless potential, then there's always these sort of flows and waves through the industry that capture and inspire people and inspire people in sort of similar time frames as well. So I think we were both sort of very much in the infrastructure space in 2017 when it was like build build build
yep,
build 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 this foundation, because I think we saw a ton of ICOs come out with like, I'm going to revolutionize the mobility space and the healthcare
yep,
space. Like,
yep,
wait a minute, I don't need to start building tooling at the ground floor. I need to start building tooling in like the center of the earth to build
yep.
anything functional in those early days. And so it was kind of all infrastructure for a little while, and it still is, to a certain extent. But when you were getting into sort of the regen finance side and the Burning Man stuff that we did at the time, there was a lot of these. There was a lot of these. Data self sovereignty ideas, and the idea of sort of being, creating a supply chain of data that was all on chain, and creating these, barter or more defined economies of how we how we trade data, how we unitize, how we monetize data. And I feel like that's kind of gone away a little bit, or at least it's sort of moved underground, or potentially to be come back on later. And same with carbon finance, like what you guys were looking on with Sonic.
Yep.
It's a no brainer of a technology for blockchain. I mean, you're taking something that is almost very challenging to unitize and kind of create a digital version of using traditional technology. And it's almost a ready-made asset for the blockchain space. But there's still a lot of infrastructure, and there's a lot of legal infrastructure that needs to be in place for a lot of that stuff to come online. And then now we're both sort of in the stablecoin space. I think it really is sort of a hallmark of, okay, we've created all of these crazy things, realize that, hey, maybe they're a little bit far out there still. Okay, so let's go all the way back to the start. And it's like, what's the first thing we need to build? It's like, okay, just a digital representation of a dollar, or an inflation adjusted one.
Yeah, it's like really, it's been, and if you look at all of that building, right? I mean, the complexity has been building in a decentralized world, right? And so we've all sort of, and throughout time, and we've seen this now, right, where people are starting to build sort of hybrid solutions where I sort of have some centralized capability. And then on the flip side, I have to build out in certain elements around decentralization. And more, we've shifted to full on decentralization as these services, the blockchains, the tools, and the SDKs, the IDEs have all become a lot more friendly, and the skill sets amongst the developer has scaled up with those emerging tool sets. And so it still amazes me that we still, each of the crashes that we go back. I mean, other than maybe 2017, 2018, you can't argue. But Mt. Gox, the original crash, was a centralized solution. And then the FTX blunder was another sort of, centralized solution. Why do we let ourselves always encounter such drawbacks, and is it just the individuals that have come in new and just grow so quickly and become greedy? Is it because there's so much money to be made in such new Wild West territories?
Yeah, and I think I mean, it's a fascinating study in human nature. I think to a
Yeah.
certain extent, and you've seen it a few times where we've tried to draw parallels between crypto stuff and traditional finance crashes, and we've seen it through like the 2008 crisis where we basically ran out of good leverage opportunities, but wanted to keep the good times going. So everybody just levered up higher and higher and
Higher
moved
and
down the
higher,
risk
yeah.
curve without sort of basically taking the punch bowl away and saying, okay, this is a normal market cycle. And that's really very similar to what happened throughout kind of 2020, 2021. Like there was a very healthy arbitrage driven yield trade in digital asset land. I mean, you could easily clip double digits in the basis trade and the grayscale arbitrage trade. And it made sense for hedge funds to lever up, borrow with BTC, pay double digits and earn higher double digits. And then it made sense for people to deploy into that space and earn high single digits or low double digits on their uncollateralized stable coins being deployed into it. There was like natural economics that flowed through it. And then the Canadian spot ETFs came out, and the grayscale ETF
Yep.
trade, the grayscale trade blew up. The basis trade kind of closed up, but nobody wanted to stop paying those single digit yields out to retail or to institutional deployers. And so you started going into Terra, you started going into the
Yeah.
messing with asset liability matching, and ultimately you try and keep that vibe going long enough, and you end up in fraud territory. Like it's you can only sort of fake the you can only sort of fake those yields for so long.
For
And
so
I think
long,
this is
right?
one of the really cool parts about DeFi, right? Is you watch DeFi yields go, they plummeted back at the kind of the start of 2022 because you can't really fake it. Like it is supply and demand, all algorithmically written out. There's no way to sort of artificially juice those. I mean, you can argue that yield farming is artificially juicing them, but at least it's artificially doing it with sort of a transparent market mechanism. Um, and so I think you asked or you mentioned about kind of what have we learned in this whole thing that we're doing here, and kind of what are the lessons around why does this keep happening? And I think there are a lot of similarities between digital asset world and traditional finance, and we learn a lot of the same mechanisms. I think it just happens on steroids, and it's so much faster, and
Yeah.
because a lot of it's machine speed as well. And I think kind of the biggest mismatch, and I think this is what we really need to sort of cling on to when we're trying to rebuild after all of this wreckage, is we we made the point that, hey, you don't need to regulate this as hard because it's all transparent, it's all on
Yeah,
chain,
exactly.
it's all
Yeah.
written out in zeros and
Yeah.
ones.
Yeah.
And then we built like hedge funds and securities lending desks and all of these centralized structures that kind of didn't have it all be transparent. Sure, we could see some of the on-chain stuff, but we don't know, what is a balance sheet transaction. We don't know what's customer funds transactions, all of that stuff. And so you almost have the worst of both worlds, where you have these centralized players that are kind of skirting regulation and holding and waving around the ethos of blockchain while not living up to it at all. And so you really need to create structures whereby if you're going to have that centralization and you're going to have people who are shareholder value at maximizing machines running these things, then you need to regulate them like centralized things. If you're going to truly create a DeFi pool that, hey, the juice isn't there, therefore algorithm says drop yields, therefore TVL drops, and you have this sort of sustainable dynamic size pool, then cool, maybe you can outsource some regulation into the code. But and those two things don't work together, and until we kind of really mesh those two, then we need to almost have two separate ways of managing these types of platforms.
Yeah, so we need so there were two things there, right? I mean, one is the decentralized worlds that are actually very transparent, they're on chain, they're governed largely by smart contracts. Those codes can be audited, those codes can be compiled, verified. The community largely over time qualifies the various protocols out there that are providing the service as they should be doing. And if the teams are good teams, then they, fix issues that the community would like to have fixed or change models the way the community wants to have them changed. And then secondary, there are these, centralized entities that are offering, that are straddling the traditional finance and the decentralized finance, right, with the lending protocols. And there it's largely a trust element or a legal element, right? What are the documents that you're signing? How are they clarified? Are you actually operating according to those contracts? And if not, then you're in breach of and doing illegal things like you would anywhere else. Um,
Yeah, and I think it always comes down to like crime is crime and fraud is
yeah,
fraud, and there's very
exactly.
limited ways to defend against that. But like, there's a lot of leeway in between there, and I think this is something that you saw with a lot of the retail lending platforms is you read their terms of service, which not a lot of people did. And
Yeah,
it's not like, hey, I am loaning my assets to you or I am depositing them in an account. It's like, here's a present. If you would deign to return it to me with gifts and rewards, that would be much appreciated. But I mean, there was really like, you have no rights. We have entire legal title over your
yeah,
assets. And it just, there's a certain amount, and I think this is, we can learn good lessons out of some of this stuff as well. Of in my bank account, I get 0%. In my blank lending account, I get 12%.
yeah,
Brain off, go over there, click button, let's do it.
yeah,
And I think that's the lesson that we need to learn from that is it's those types of obvious giant value propositions that are going to drive adoption.
yeah.
Now we just need to do it so that it's like an actual value proposition, not sort of a quickly done thing that doesn't necessarily hold up over time. But you saw hundreds of billions of dollars flow in through that value gap, and it's those huge types of things that are really going to drive people. And I think we can start getting into that now with some of the stuff you're working on with inflation adjusted stable coins,
Yeah.
some of the cross border payment stuff that we're working on, like
Yeah.
90, 95% cost savings. Like, why wouldn't you do that? It's so obvious to do it.
But I think one of the things that you mentioned is really interesting, right? So on the one hand, I have a terms and service. And that terms and service actually, from a legal standpoint, cleans keeps me clear, right? I'm giving you it's a donation, and if you likely by any chance give me something back, I'm going to be happy, and I'll receive something back, right? Um, and so we enter into a sort of new world where how much is legal versus ethical, right? I mean, is today, the ethics more important than the legal framework, right? Because you can lawyer up and it's who can afford better lawyers, how long can you hold out, how long can you fight the campaigns that go through that then give you a strong, stable, environment. Whereas today, and particularly in crypto, it's really the community, and the community is really driven largely by ethics or values, maybe as another way, right? Not just ethics and values. How do we change that, and how do we govern that, and how do we operate in an environment like that, right? You need to be much more attuned. It's not shareholder value anymore, like you said right at the beginning, right? It's now community value, or that's your moat. Your moat is your community.
Yeah, and you said a couple of really interesting things there as well, and I love the idea, and I've thought this a few times of we've kind of changed some of the terms in crypto to reflect new things, or pretend like they're reflecting new things, but are actually
Yeah.
reflecting very old things. And I think, just back to this terms and conditions thing for a little while, like, how much are we trained to not ever
Yeah.
read terms and conditions on anything? It's like, yup, let me play house party now, please. No further questions. And so when you create these technological experiences and you sort of simulate that, oh, this is a game, or this is fun, or like over gamification, you get that same type of consumer behavior.
Yeah.
And you're exactly right. Like, you are protected. You can put anything up, but it's sort of like, cookies and those types of policies of like, okay, how do we force sort of true comprehension? How do we, opt in versus not just opt out of things like that?
Yeah.
And there's some level of inspiration we can draw from a couple of initiatives. So the accredited investor rule has always been an interesting piece that's driven a lot of people crazy. And back in the venture fund days, we actually almost almost started some legal action just to prove a point around how ridiculous the accredited investor rules are. Like, one of my analysts is probably one of the top 15 blockchain minds in the country, and couldn't invest in his own fund because he doesn't meet the accredited investor rules, right? And so it's what has happened recently, though, is the Ontario Securities Commission. I think there's been some similar things in the SEC. They've started to have more exemptions for demonstrated levels of education. So if you have a certain professional designation, then you're automatically accredited regardless of income standards. And stuff like that just sort of grows the moat, but it's still not perfect. But this idea of sort of demonstrating comprehension, and demonstrating that you understand, and demonstrating that you're paying attention, I think that's one way to sort of start to tackle some of this click, 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 never really pay attention. And on the flip side of it, this idea of what you mentioned of kind of a self-regulating organization, or a set of crypto standards that we need to hold ourselves to. And what's great about our industry is that when we decide standards, we can actually codify them into code law, right? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
getting people to agree on what those standards are is potentially a excellent way to further challenge decentralized governance mechanisms. But I think there's this sort of dual standard of putting some threshold in place before playing in whatever types of solutions these are. And whether that standard comes from a regulatory body and is more traditional, and there's pros and cons to that, or it comes from an industry type where, hey, we need to hold ourselves to these certain levels of disclosures, these certain types of tests, these certain types of gating items before people can kind of have access to the entire world. I think stuff like that is important, even to get well, A, to allow us all to sleep at night, but B, to getting that sort of real sense of legitimacy and value in the industry. And I do have a data point to make in a sec, but I want to
Yeah.
see where you go on those two.
I I I I mean, I wish we would keep T's and C's to one page. All contracts. How can we get everything to one page? Simplify it, and if that means you need to edit the words down, get rid of fluffy words. Just bring it to one page, one A4, one letter page. Whatever the format is, but just get it to one page. And if you need to visualize it, even better. Sort of just work that flow through, have descriptions there. To me, that would be then people would read it.
Yep. Yep.
Because then I could sort of, okay, I can digest it, right? Of course, then people will start cheating because then they'll write it in 6 font, or something. So then,
I've got a very tangible example of that. So DeFi insurance, right? So
yeah,
it's really, really
yeah,
cool construct. We saw a ton of it payoff, and all sorts of challenges and good case studies and bad case studies, particularly in the aftermath of UST.
Terra.
And
Yep.
and luckily, well, luckily for some, unluckily for others, there's not a ton of decentralized insurance on exchanges, although there is some. But it's the policies for that are 3 pages long, written in very plain language, and
Nice.
they are easily understood. Now there are, and this is exactly why we ended up with 500-page contracts in the first place. There are gray areas in those types of contracts, right? If you one of the examples in DeFi insurance is there's a cooling off period after you first deploy into a contract. You can't make a claim for 10 days. That varies by platform, but generally it's so there needs to be a certain level of time that elapses between when you first deploy. But these contracts are denominated in ETH most of the time, so ETH fluctuates, and so you need to sort of rebalance and manage the value of your
Yep.
contract if you're
Yep.
defending something in dollar terms. So there's this this policy or piece in the policy that's like one sentence long that says, well, if you rebalance, then the cooling off period doesn't matter. And it says rebalancing is generally between X period and X period. But so what happened is there's a time that you rebalance, and it hasn't been for a while because ETH hasn't moved, and then
Yep.
the event happens 3 days later, and so it's like, well, was that a rebalancing? Why would I rebalance on a periodic basis if the basis for rebalancing isn't there? And so, the policy is sort of unclear on that. And what was a real like eye-opening moment for us as we were going through this was it's not a company that you need. It's not Lloyd's of London. You can be like, the policy
Yeah.
says
Yeah.
this,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
and we were kind of in Discord like roasting people for like, this isn't what it said, and they're like, this is the community governed thing, man. Make your case to the community. I was
Yeah.
like, that's exactly right. That is exactly true. And that's really cool. And it's such a cool example of all of this decentralized governance. But I'm sure that the next time they go through it, it'll be okay. Well, this is what rebalancing actually means, as per this community case law, when this
Yeah.
person
Yeah.
made, and then it'll end up grow, 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 grow. And it's I agree with you that getting it down to those short things, and it's easy to comprehend and it's easy to understand, and there's some hybrid way to do it that doesn't require these 500 or 500-page contracts, but gives you the specificity to need to business plan, right?
But that's the interesting thing. A big thing and a big difference is that all of a sudden it's not writing a letter to Lloyd's and then getting to the head of the VP of services or manager or GM or CEO or whatever. It is going to the actual community and rallying the community behind what we're working on, right? And you need to then write in the forums, express your case, really document it well, rally the community behind your case, and get them to endorse it and support you, right? So you actually need to be involved in that, in that club, in that church, in that association, and you need to be a part of that. And it's very similar to the service that you're subscribing to. And insurance, I need to be a part of that insurance community, that DAO, right? And it's just another association, a club, a society, so it's interesting.
No, you're exactly right too, and I think we're so used to this like service providee relationship where it's like, this is what it says. I pay my money. I don't understand it, but someone told me it's okay, and hopefully I never have to deal with it or think about it ever again. And if I do, I'll hire somebody else to interpret it. And it's so different in it's almost going back hundreds of years into kind of recreating societal norms and what you have to do, and that's why it was such like a mindset shift coming from a big institution to be told by the authority figure that's like, I don't have the authority. This is you are claiming against community assets, according to a set of rules that the community agreed on. If you don't agree with one of the rules, then take it to the community, because this is exactly the point.
Yeah.
And so I think there's sort of a radical change in mindsets that we need to kind of go through to do this as well. And that's why I encourage everybody. And you do see it, and I think you'll see it more and more as we kind of rebuild this next deep winter. You got to get out there and play with it. Like, you got to get out there and vote. You got to go out and create some weird proposals on Compound. Like, you got to get out and participate in these types of structures. You can't just buy and hold and hope that it'll all work. And I think that there's been a lot of sort of non-participatory capital that has come in over this last run, and that's fine. Like, we're not going to get a ton of tech people who are really kind of getting their hands dirty. But I think, and I was talking about this earlier today, this next leg, like, we need to go back to the ethos in a lot of these ways. And I think we kind of got away from that a little bit through this last bull run. Like, we need to get back to the decentralization ethos, like code is law. This is what will be written out. This sort of radical inclusion mindset. Everybody has a voice. There's a defined way to up your participation value. Everything on chain or everything you do online is recognized and has some value. Like, there's sort of a level of participation that I think needs to drive the next wave of adoption here as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting because deals are going to be done a lot less between people, right? It's going to be done through, I have a suggestion. It's like, I can't close a deal and shake a deal with Alex anymore, or negotiate back and forth. Maybe we can negotiate the terms, but it's all going to be documented online in a forum where I have to pitch my case. I have to put forward the case. This is how and then the community chimes in. And then if there's enough community engagement, then maybe it gets put forward as a proposal. Then as the proposal, people have to vote on it, right? And so it's like, it's going to be a very different world in terms of interactions between entities or communities or businesses, or I don't know what the right word will be, but it's going to be an evolution for sure.
Yeah, well, and you raised a couple of interesting points there. I mean, you were involved with Haifa and the seeds ecosystem
Yeah.
and all of that stuff during kind of the regen finance side, and a lot of that was on display there. I mean, I give those guys a ton of credit for taking some radically different views of creating organizations and scaling it to community participation and proposals, and really sort of taking it away from the traditional way of managing things. And they brought some incredibly interesting people into that group, and some incredibly interesting projects and proposals. This kind of radically different way of running decentralized organizations. And I think to your point on negotiation, that was actually one of the first things that I thought about doing when I quit banking, or when I first left banking. And actually, the one of the reasons I kind of left banking is I built an entire like merger model where we just automated the whole thing, and all you needed to do was just dump in two tickers, and like entire merger math and like negotiation points would sort of fall out of it. And you could like at one point, like, why am I here as a junior banker anymore? We can just do this entirely by machine. But in another point, it was the whole deal making process of, okay, I'm a business broker. I have my 10 companies. I'm a small business. I have no idea how to go about selling or finding people or doing this. Like, we end up in such suboptimal outcomes when we do this entirely manually and offline. There is a huge scope for, finally, I found my person. I can handshake. We can do a high five deal, and let's get this done.
Yeah.
What's the rule on humans? You can only have like 150 real contacts before it's just beyond our capacity to manage it. And so there's such a scope for, and we did a lot of this when we were kind of fleshing out this platform of automated negotiation, data-driven negotiation, like getting to better outcomes when you can expand the community and the type of people that you can interact with, and engage AI, engage kind of machine learning, engage those types of additional technology to get to better outcomes overall. And I think it's really these sort of hybrid governance mechanisms that allow you to do that, where it's not just purely offline, shake the hand. It's not purely this is the outcome and it's a black box how we got there. It really is using machine learning to parse the crazy technical parts of negotiation, and using crowdsourcing and using sort of those other ways to expand past beyond what we can do as just individuals to create these kind of better outcomes for everybody and get past biases, like all of the things that sort of have hampered deal making and hampered businesses for a long time. I think there's such an opportunity to codify that, create it in these open source forums, have it be chaotic and weird and ugly, and ultimately get to better outcomes. I think it's our kind of job now in the aftermath of a lot of this chaos to sort of rebuild those structures as well.
Yeah. And put them actually into action, right? I mean, it's going to require a different set of, different people will emerge out of this, right? Because the approach will be very different, right? I mean, it's really, you've got to have a different nature in terms of how to corral people, how to document stuff, how to motivate people, and yeah, a community and rally them. It's definitely going to be a different approach to things moving forward, right? And I don't think it's going to happen overnight, for sure not, right? We're so entrenched in, we don't like trustless, right? We like trust. I want to trust a person, right? I want to call a guy, Sam Bankman-Fried, and call him and say, "Where the fuck is my money?" Right? I want to call somebody or just be able to talk to some versus some arbitrary community. And if I'm bringing up some bad news, nobody's going to want to respond to that, right? Unless there's a huge constituent, right? But if it's damaging and it's an actual fact and it's damaging to the community, where does that leave everything, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think this is kind of the time to experiment with some of those, and there's been a lot on kind of the DAO side, and that's been sort of a quiet area of growth. I think because there's not a ton of economics really attached to it right now. It's sort of radical experimentation without a ton of dollars attached to it, which is really fascinating. But I think kind of one of the things that I've always been fascinated by in terms of kind of decentralized governance and automated governance is well, I guess two things. One, this concept of I don't know, on-chain reputation. I'm not sure if that's kind of necessarily the right word, but like where quadratic voting is a word that gets sort of thrown around a lot on the side, but where everything you do has some level of impact on your standing or your reputation within the community. So I think this everybody gets kind of completely open, equal access is challenging. Like there's some level of to your point before of okay, you need to get in there, you need to mix it up, you need to rally people to you, you need to do all that stuff. I think some of that needs to be sort of signal mechanismed as well,
Yep.
where okay, this person has just joined versus this person's been here for a year and has this many quotes, this much karma, whatever. That type of kind of sort of reputation structure, which I know is being being worked on in a lot of these forums. But the other one is where kind of human decision making gets factored into smart contract style logic. And the one I always use and the one I always think about is like loan covenants. It's very kind of cut and dry, and it is very this is what your loan covenant says. But if you've got a loan from a bank as a small business, you get you're not going to meet your debt to EBITDA covenant. You're going to be off by point one. You call up Larry from the bank and be like, "Big guy, I'm not
Exactly.
going to make it.
Hey, I'm coming. How are we going to do this?
Here, let's talk it
Yeah,
out,"
yeah,
and be
yeah,
like, "Don't even
yeah,
worry about it. Here's a quarterly extension." Um, but in smart contract land, it's like you're 0.0001 off one block after it's done. It's like your collateral's liquidated, you're done, you're gone. And yeah, those are both, very different ways to do it, obviously. And I don't think a lot of people think about kind of that side of it when we're advocating for this, transparent type of smart contract logic that goes into these platforms. But I think there is sort of a hybrid model where it's okay. This is flagged as in default right now, and it needs a human to kind of arbitrate and waive, or for these exact reasons you can unlock this and go that way. And I think there's really sort of taking it from human discretion is everything,
Yep.
with some business processes that are, I read in a handbook one time when I first joined the bank, versus okay, there are hard and fast rules and human discretion is only where it's kind of needed. I think
Yep.
that's the kind of evolution that we're going to start going towards as well.
Yeah, there was this really good podcast where, I don't know, there's this economist and a former banker, Werner Herzog is his name, out of, he used to be in Japan, then he's in Germany, and he was talking about the importance, coming back to your lending example, right? He was talking about the importance of the having smaller banks that are more in tune with the local environment and the local businesses, right? Ultimately, there's also a bit more accountability because we know each other, we hang out in the same neighborhood, we go to the same events, we all sort of are tighter knit community. And over time, I know your business, right? I know what operations you have. I know somehow you've banked with me for, I don't know, the last 10 years. And I see your credit rating as a result. There's a little bit of human element in there. So when you need a loan, like DCG does right now, there are some people you can call, and then there's somebody at the end of the line that says, yeah, look, I can give you a shortfall, I can cover you, why don't I, or you want to work on this new R&D feature because this is the only way you're going to be able to compete against this new upcoming technology innovation. How do you do that, right? And then so because I know your business, because I understand it, I can give you a loan within 1-2 days. You don't need to wait the 27 procedures, fill out 3,000 forms, and then be able to get there, right? And so there's that nice balance that I think we do need. And how do we achieve that? I think it's, yeah, ultimately a lot of it's time, right? I mean, it's how long have you been in the industry? Who else do you know? How do you know the right people? Do you have banks that have banked with you for a while period of time, right? It's a building that credibility, unfortunately, still takes time. Earning trust takes time.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of one of the things that, going all the way back to when I first joined the industry is, this idea of kind of like scaling trust and monetizing trust, and really sort of these trust frictions that we build. I mean, when you started out with communities, that was entirely what it was. You only knew kind of the people in your immediate area, and sort of one of the first ways that we achieved scale in commerce in general was these like international banking houses, right? Like the Medicis and people like that. And they basically were like, I know this person in Venice, so you can give them a loan in New York because of trust. And even, we kind of scaled it to like fashion houses as well. Like the big fashion houses in Paris said, okay, well, this is what people here like. You can trust me, so you can sell them the same thing in New York or in
In New
Toronto or
York,
whatever.
exactly, yeah.
And so it's almost like kind of going back, but that has huge limitations. And it's like, why do the Medicis get to decide who is trustworthy? And so it's
Yeah,
almost taking those sort of core fundamentals, stripping them down to kind of the basic bare bones, and building tech around them, right?
yeah,
And so it's like, okay, what are the universal components or ingredients to the trust that would then go out into the world from those big sort of offline trust brokers of back in the day? And that's, that's really hard, right? Like it's not an easy thing to do at all. But I think that's, if we can kind of keep that idea of, okay, how did we originally do this hundreds of years ago before technology entirely, when it was entirely people? So I think a big part of it is sort of, re-injecting humanity into this like ever increasingly machine speed world. and kind of trying to recapture that core and codifying that. I think that's going to be kind of a big part of this next wave of community governance.
Yep. But I think
Sorry,
it's
go
also the
ahead.
decentralization element of that, right? It's like it's no longer these big centralized monolithic institutions that decide globally this is the fashion, right? Paris decides what fashion is, right? Or Medici decides what the financial services are that everybody has to get, and you don't get any more. Now it's much more decentralizing a lot of that, right? And sort of empowering um, the communities, right? And they can be global communities, but just in a niche area focused on a common interest, or they can be a regional community, right? In a geography, in a little city or in a village, right? And so I think these different models are now available.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think I didn't necessarily intend to get to this point, but I always love getting back to it. Is reprogramming the machines a little bit from, hey, we've said shareholder value maximization a few times. I
Yeah,
mean, we basically built our corporations into
yeah,
shareholder value
yeah,
maximizing
yeah.
machines, and then we've taken humans out of most layers of decision making, and it's like we are doing the thing that makes the most money, where that used to be like more money used to be a proxy for being a better corporate citizen, blah blah blah, before technology way back in the day. And now that we have all of this ability to automate, let's think about how we reprogram the machines. What are we optimizing them for? Is it carbon neutrality? Is it like dopamine maximization? I mean, you can get as crazy and silly as you want on how are you programming kind of your maximizing machine. But one idea that I sort of love is this idea of optimizing for sustainability versus optimizing for growth. And I think we see it like DeFi pools are kind of a great, just a super simple example. When the pool gets too big, the incentives to put more into it drop, 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 and the
Yep.
incentives to take assets out of it grow, 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 grow. You don't have that in a company. When a company gets bigger, the incentives it doesn't get incentivized to get smaller. It
No.
gets incentivized to become bigger, but growing on a bigger base is even harder. So you end up in that the almost like the lending model that we talked about, where the easy yields are gone, and so you need to get crazier and crazier. Um, and I think you can extend that logic to a whole bunch of these kind of decisions now. Of okay, what is and to Werner Herzog's concept of kind of smaller banks as well.
Yep.
It's about a pool of assets that makes sense for that community. And when that pool is depleted, then incentivize people to replenish it, incentivize people to pay back into it. And when that pool gets big, then open it up to other communities, allow other people to draw on it, so that it kind of comes back down to where it's the right size. And that's again, it's sort of a complete mindset shift around our grow, 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 maximize shareholder value. And we don't have the models or the codification around how to even we don't have the language to even talk about that a lot of the time. But that's the kind of stuff that really gets me going for like 20 years from now about what we can do on it.
But I think one thing that I mean is interesting, right? You've been very much focused also on building cross-border trade, right? I mean, particularly between the U.S. and Canada, but ultimately, cross-border trade matters beyond those boundaries, right? And how do you feel with the current at a macro level, right? This whole notion of deglobalization, right? Where all of a sudden, I mean, our view is inflation's here to stay because of deglobalization, because you do not have the economies of scale on a unit per unit basis anymore due to this deglobalization. I can't have one factory anywhere on the world building for the whole planet, right? And leveraging one R&D to do that. Now I've got to have 15 R&D centers, 27 factories, all with the same machines, and each one now slicing and dicing the economy. So ultimately that's going to lead to increase in costs. So where do you view that? I mean, in a way, it's good because it's decentralizing, right? So it's bringing it to a local level. But how do you view, with crypto, the internet, e-commerce, we've been building everything to connect the fabric of the planet optimize the resources available on the planet to build a better planet. Whereas now we're going back to the opposite, where it's, ooh, I got to protect my own economy, my own resources. I mean, how do you have an opinion or a view on that, or yeah, and
Yeah,
what are you
absolutely. I
seeing? I
mean,
mean,
I think you kind of go back to the original view of the Satoshi white paper, and it was to
yeah,
create this global structure of commerce. And we've patted ourselves on the back about that in crypto for years and done not very much with it. And a lot of it, it's the reason we're both kind of working on the stablecoin side is if I'm running a margin based business in Kentucky or India or Europe or wherever, I can't have the global currency Bitcoin dropping by 40% and be like,
yeah,
my business doesn't make sense anymore. And so, we've kind of hacked it in a couple ways. And eventually, if we're all on this Bitcoin standard or whatever the currency is, maybe that does make sense where, hey, I no longer need to denominate in local currencies because I can pay my staff, I can do this, I can do that. And it's all in the same currency. So fluctuations according to other things don't matter. Maybe we will get there. Who knows? And that is a potential cool outcome. We've sort of hacked it right now with U.S. dollar hegemony in stablecoins, right? Where it's like, okay, well, everything gets denominated to the U.S. dollar. We trade everything into the U.S. dollar, and then you can deal with your little currency fluctuations at the edge. And sorry if that doesn't quite work for you.
yeah,
And that's okay. It's a bit of a step in the right direction. It's better than Bitcoin volatility, but there's still major local currency volatility. You still end up with FX risks. I mean, even in Canada, where the currency between Canada and the U.S. is not it's not that volatile, except for last week where it inexplicably became volatile. But even those like 2 or 3%, if you're moving millions of dollars around, those are like meaningful hits to your bottom line. And so I think yes, we have kind of these like stablecoin system of commerce now that's getting better, and you can start to skip the correspondent banking structure with it, which is a huge part of this stablecoin structure of global commerce in general. But we really need this interoperable system of digital dollars in every currency that people can take all the way to the edge. I mean, I think I said it on a podcast with Dante from Circle the other week. It's almost like fiber to the home versus fiber to the curb. Like it's great that you can get fiber all the way out there, but really unlocking that special kind of magic is the last mile as well of local currency stablecoins. And a lot of that needs on-chain FX. It needs liquidity in all of these coins. It needs harmonization of regulation across country. You can't have something be a payment token versus an unregistered
yeah,
security
yeah,
versus
yeah,
that just doesn't work. So there's all of these kind of things, but I think it's all in service of exactly what you said. This idea of a globally optimized structure of commerce that doesn't have these sort of artificial barriers or artificial friction points that keep certain places artificially small, inflate the importance of certain places, empower banks and financial institutions way too much as sort of the gatekeepers of those cross-border things, but really creates that structure whereby I can have an idea anywhere, put it down in code, and have the global system of commerce feed me the right currencies, the right resources, the right pieces of labor. And where there is physical stuff, where there's intellectual property, I can import from other places, and have it all work to the last mile and to the actual edge. Eventually, again, if we all end up on one global currency because this works so well, that's an interesting outcome. But we're obviously miles from that, and
yeah.
we started it with U.S. dollars, but we need to add those other currencies as well, and we need to have the right structure whereby you can do what you do today, which is pay bills, end up in bank accounts, like all the boring shit of international commerce that we do today. We need to first make that 90% better, those step function value propositions. And then we can keep growing from there. Then we can create these entirely machine speed webs of commerce, blah, blah, blah. But as long as we have that jump into fiat, we're always going to be artificially limited in kind of the crazy cool stuff that we can build. So that's really why we think about cross-border commerce is sort of taking a barrier out of these really, really, really interesting structures of global commerce that you're talking about, Stefan.
Yeah, and I think it's like and I struggle with. I mean, I've grown up. I was born in a country. Went to school in a different country, set up businesses in many different countries, and run businesses across many different countries around the world, right? And so I struggle with this notion where we should limit ourselves only to one jurisdiction, and then you see egos come in that are running and representing specific jurisdictions that feel, just out of ego, we need to make sure that our laws are the best laws and above all laws, versus what is actually going to benefit society the most, right? Okay, we feel we want energy independence. Okay, then go figure that out, right? Work that out. But that doesn't mean at the cost of being able to import other energy. I mean, why shouldn't we be able to transport energy, right? And I don't know. I don't know where I'm going, but I just feel that the jurisdictions around the world create what FTX actually took advantage of, right? Where I just set up law entities around the world in 700 different jurisdictions. And by the way, this is no different to Enron. I was just watching the Enron movie, documentary on, the smartest guys. It's exactly the same. They built all these offshore entities and they moved all the debt onto these offshore entities. So it was shaded and hidden. And it was, by the way, audited, right? So by attestation, by accounted, registered auditors, right? So it's like, it's like where bad people will be bad people, full stop, right?
Yeah, and the jurisdictional arbitrage is an interesting point to this whole thing as well, where
Yep.
and we've seen the good and the bad of it. I mean, Bermuda, fantastic example. They have a great jurisdiction, great legislation, great rules, very thoughtful and progressive, and a small country that has attracted some really interesting businesses. And the counterpoint is, okay, well, I want to run and set up a business as fast as possible, and I want to go to Vanuatu or one of the other jurisdictions where I can do whatever I want, and because of international capital flows, then I can generally run not a full business, obviously, but I can run. I can access a fair amount of the world from these places that would not have historically been able to support any of the operations that I need to do.
Yeah.
And so I think it's sort of finding the good examples and learning the right things from them. Of hey, setting up and spending the time to get a thoughtful, progressive digital asset regulatory regime is a way for smaller countries to compete on a global scale, but without sort of falling prey to the bad lessons of hey, setting up a haven for bad actors and then still taking advantage of all of those sort of international friction reduction agents that we've created in this space. So I totally agree with you, and I think ultimately it comes down to hiding in complexity. And if
Yeah.
we have this crazy regulatory world right now where all of our AML regime is around detection and around people and around sort of history versus on chain where it's around that asset. It's like, hey, that
Yeah.
asset came from there. It's bad. It's way simpler, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
Much
okay, you
easier.
got these wallets like monitored, and it's very different. I mean, obviously, that's a gross oversimplification of how it actually works, but if I think it's back to something we were talking about earlier of if you hide in the crypto ethos but still operate in kind of V1 or centralized world, there's a lot of holes to drive bad actions through. So if you're going to, or if we as a society and world are going to go the crypto ethos route, we need to go all the way and create enforcement regimes that are using on-chain transparency, on-chain analytics, and really sort of put governance at machine speed on chain as well. It's really hard to have this sort of hybrid model because you're just creating these sort of cracks for bad actors to hide in, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, in my view, it's just gonna create more and more challenge, right? Just the concept of AML, and we're so focused on KYC and AML, right? It's all it's about every regulation and it's all about that step. But actually, there's so much more to it, right? It's really That's the worst and least important element around everything, right? I mean, sure, it's important, right? But I mean, in the end, what is the asset? What is the movement of that asset? Where did that asset come from, right? Is that an asset that is allowed to move into here? And those are things that I feel um, there are so
Well,
many there's so much better ways of allocating resources to identifying what is good and what is bad, right? And versus just stepping on regulation after regulation after regulation, where it's become now so hard. I went to FedEx and I wanted to send a actual letter in an envelope to Hong Kong. I could not, FedEx would not send it because I didn't have an export license for a letter. I mean, it's like that's how crazy the world has become. And then
yeah,
I could go down to the U.S. Postal Service and I post it from there, and no problem, no problem. They sign it, they send it. So
yeah.
it's like what's going on? You know, it's like I mean, okay, it's taken now 10 days instead of the 2 days that FedEx would have sent it in.
And I think some of it just with regards to digital asset stuff is it's almost top down versus bottom up enforcement. Like we in sort of traditional world, we don't have the technology to follow money around on a dollar by dollar basis. Like
Yep.
a certain amount, we can uncover accounts and we can get swift reconciliations and that stuff. But there's so many places where it sort of drops off the grid. It goes into cash. There's 10
Yeah.
hold codes buried in complexity. Shell companies, all of that stuff. And there's a huge business around kind of financial crimes and sort of peeling all of that stuff apart. And so I think we generally try and simplify it by being like by trying to profile actors instead, saying, okay, if you send $9,999 when there's a $10,000 limit over and over again every day, then you must be doing something bad, so you're going to be
Yep.
high risk.
Yeah.
Whereas and it's sort of this top-down approach because it's like it's too complex to go anything deeper than that. You need to sort of hack it. And in crypto land, it's almost the other way around, where okay, like each dollar can be traced around, and it's like that was a bad wallet; it came from there, so this is bad. And so if you kind of go that route and say, and the top down approach has very little privacy, right? Everybody needs to step into the light. Everybody needs to identify themselves and say, hey, I'm this person. The other route, when you go from kind of bottom up, if you're never transacting with any bad addresses, if you're doing everything that matches that, like, do you need to go that entire route? Do you need to sort of step all the way in? And we kind of have this unofficial threshold in traditional world right now, where under $1,000 or under a certain threshold, you don't need to report it. It just is what it is. It's basically a simulation of a petty cash transaction, and regulators have kind of implicitly or explicitly said, "Hey, under a certain amount, we're okay with privacy." And that's my worry about digital asset world is because you can now have that extreme transparency, are we going to just layer on the top down approach onto the bottoms up approach and have an individual known every cent and dollar that they spend, where you sort of need to choose one to preserve some level of societal hands-offness or whether it's privacy, and that's always a loaded word, but some sort of kind of functional structure. So somebody at some point needs to choose to ignore on-chain transactions if we're going to continue to go the top-down route. And that's really hard. But that's one of the things that's a bit scary about CBDCs is
Yeah, I mean the whole beauty on-chain transactions is that I mean, the transactions less so. I mean, it's nice to see the transaction. I can see the in and out and everything. But the beauty around seeing on chain values, the TVLs, right? LTVs associated with a smart contract, etc. Right? Those are all helping with. I don't need a specific proof of reserve. I don't need a specific, proof of liabilities or attestation from an independent auditor. Right? It's actually live for anybody to see, and anybody can translate it.
One important thing that's become really, really apparent in the last little while, and I'm guilty of this to a certain extent myself, is I think we all, maybe not all, but there's a certain false sense of security from saying, hey, I know what your cold storage wallets are, I can trace assets in and out, because
Yep.
you don't have the financial context of what those assets are. Are they treasury funds? Is this a loan? Is this a
Yeah.
repayment? Is this collateral coming in versus a revenue source coming in? So what's awesome about platforms like Maple or CDFI platforms is you sort of have this hybrid where every asset flow has a smart contract function that's attached to it. It's like this is a repayment of default. This asset flow is interest. This is a staking of first loss capital. And it's like that is a mind blowing level of sophistication is not the right word, but it's the perfect hybrid between the two. You can have a traditional business logic, but when you have it written out in smart contracts and actually have each value transfer tagged to a smart contract function, then you can start having this kind of universal transparency into all of these assets and all of these types of on-chain movements. And like those types of innovations they're quiet and subtle, but that's really what's super powerful about kind of the
Yeah.
next generation of the space. And I mean, if SBF and FTX had that, there just would have been no way to do this, right?
Yeah.
Like you can do it if you hide in TradFi complexity worlds, and you move money around, and maybe it comes out in a while, or somebody flags something, and then you start looking into it more. And you can do it in, okay, I'm an on-chain operator, and you know my wallets, but you don't know what these assets are. But you absolutely cannot do it in smart contract world, and unless major fraud maybe. But you make the barrier to committing those crimes so much higher with all of these new innovations, and each meltdown like this forces us to get better at it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's it, right? Each meltdown improves the ecosystem, strengthens it. Some meltdowns have bigger repercussions, but actually, if you look back through history, every meltdown had a significantly, quite a long recovery period, right? There's been no tax bailouts, no tax dollar has been paid, no government bailouts. It's all been the community that funded these bailouts, right? And some of the community members decided to leave. They don't want to be a part of this community anymore. A lot of them come back when the ecosystem picks up again. And some of us just stay in. But each time we have such a disruption, each time the people that stay in grow, right? It grows. But then also people just retire, I guess, out of it as well and sort of take a more relaxed stand. But I think once you've had the crypto bug, it's super hard to let it go. I just don't think you can drop it.
Yeah, well, and I've had the benefit of being the first place of employment of many exceptional ex finance people at Stablecorp and Bicameral and a few of the companies that we've worked with,
Yeah.
and it's almost scary in a way. You kind of come in as like, oh yeah, I go home and I do my thing and I work in my job, and then you see those same people like 3 months later, and this is not necessarily a good thing, but like 2 a.m. just hammering stuff out, being like, "Oh, this is amazing! We got to do this. We got to do that." And it's like, okay, this is kind of like the world on steroids, and you're so much more engaged. You're so much more passionate about it. But I also think like you saw it. I'm sure we're about to see it now. We also saw it at the end of like after Terra melted down. The crypto world just shut down for like 2 months. It's like everybody just went on a mental health break and was like, too crazy, cannot deal with this. Like everybody went quiet for it for like a month and a half, and that does happen as well. Like there's safeguards around the traditional worlds, and all of those are not there in crypto. And you're sort
Nope.
of strapped to a machine that's bigger than you. It can absolutely destroy you. It can make you $1 billion and then take it away the next day.
Yeah.
And it's like, how could you go back to kind of like kitty glove finance after that when you've kind of played in this world? But it's crazy, man. But it's awesome to catch up with you again and kind of dive into all this stuff.
Yeah, and that's why it's super exciting, right? I mean, there's so much adrenaline, there's so much opportunity in this space. It's nonstop. You're always learning. Every day there's a new exciting activity, and you are a part of it. You are in the machine and moving with the machine. And there's a sense of purpose that we all have in trying to build something new that has the efficiencies that you mentioned really early on. So, yeah. Thank you, Alex. Super exciting. Where can people follow and learn about Stablecorp, or maybe Alex yourself? And
Amazing.
uh,
Yeah, absolutely. So LinkedIn, probably the biggest one for me. Twitter is weird, but I am on there sometimes. Stablecorp.ca, we just launched a new website. Grapesfinance.com is our front end cross border platform. We're launching Yield as a Service, which is a entirely new way to sort of think about the next generation of yield generation, which will be yasdigital.com. So there's a whole bunch of ways, but LinkedIn probably the easiest way, and stablecorp.ca has the link to all of those things. But thanks a ton for having me, Stefan. I'm always extremely interested in what you're up to. It's wonderful to hang out, wonderful to chat, and I will see you in Miami in a week, my friend.
yeah, the next weekend, next week. So look forward to that. And thanks for your time. And yeah, um, awesome insights. Everybody, hopefully you're super excited like I am. And see you next week in Miami, Alex. Thank you.
Absolutely, my friend.
Thanks
Take
for
it
your
easy.
time. Thank you.